So again, greetings, and so one of the principles of vipassana or mindfulness practice is developing the capacity to include everything in mindfulness, and that there's no outside of what's acceptable or appropriate for it to bring its kind of careful, respectful attention of mindfulness to. And when there's really no outside, everything's included. I like to think of that as what is sacred, and we lose the sacred as soon as we have what we consider appropriate for attention and what's outside, and we exclude from that. And so certainly one of the things that is appropriate for mindfulness is thinking. It's not only about avoiding thoughts or not trying not to think, but a very important part of human life is thinking, and learning how to be mindful of it is really a life skill. It's also very, very helpful to understand, get a real good handle of how to be mindful of thinking and how to see the different components of it as meditation goes deeper and deeper. But one of the things that we could include as part of this wide field of mindfulness is what I call what is just outside of mindfulness. What's beyond mindfulness, not the mindfulness, what's beyond thinking, what's outside of thinking. Many of us take up residency in our thoughts. That's where we live, and we see the world through the filter of our ideas and thoughts and everything. And we don't realize we're living inside because it's a huge house in a sense, and it just seems to encompass everything, whatever we think about. And but once we step out of that house and look back and watch ourselves think, recognize ourselves thinking, perhaps localize where the thinking is happening, where the voice is, inner voice, or where the projection is of the images, then you can also ask the question, what is underneath thinking? What is above it? What's behind it? What's beyond the edges of it? And then it starts getting more and more interesting, the practice. And for one thing, we started realizing that thinking is not the only show in town. In fact, it might not even be the most interesting show in town. And the practice can open up to more aspects of experience. So to take a comfortable, alert posture and allowing your eyelids to close, and allowing your body to settle. Allowing it to settle because you're aware of your body, and you're aware of it in a way that gives space and allowance to whatever you feel in your body. So any natural tendency of the body itself to relax, settle, has a chance, has room. And perhaps taking a few long, slow, deep breaths as a ritual of connection to yourself, here and now. And perhaps taking these deep breaths in a way that's gentle, loving, appreciating, and feeling the expansion of the body as you breathe in, fullness of the lungs, whatever pressure there is in the diaphragm. The movements of the belly as it expands, perhaps. Breathing in deeply and feeling also maybe you feel the space between the ribs expand as you breathe in. And maybe you feel the expansion of the back, the ribs in the back. And also a caring exhale, long, gentle, not forced so you lose your breath, but a little bit longer than usual, as a releasing in which you also relax your body, settling in. And then letting your breathing return to normal. And for 3 breaths, just tune in to whatever is the easy breathing for you. And perhaps moving through your body, aware that the body itself is something other than thinking. Moving, scanning the body, and seeing if there's any obvious places to relax and settle the body. Maybe from the head down, the face, the shoulders, the chest and the belly. And then continuing to breathe, mindful of breathing. And maybe whenever you are exhaling, you can remember to let go of your thoughts or let your thoughts recede to the background. If thinking is in the background and not interfering with mindfulness of breathing, no need to do anything special with your thoughts. Just let them be in the background. And stay with your breathing. Settle into your breathing. And then bring your attention to the edges of your body and sense how you experience as the edge of your body. It's probably somewhat indistinct in places. Some places it's clear, like where the body's touching some object. But where the body doesn't touch a physical object, it might be somewhat indistinct or diffuse, the edges of the body. And where the body is not touching anything, just beyond the edges of that body, can you sense or feel or sense the space beyond the body, spaciousness, a kind of stillness that's just beyond the edge of the body. Maybe a kind of silence. And for a few moments, breathe into the space or stillness or silence that's just beyond the edges of your body. And then can you feel also that silence and stillness, spaciousness, is also beyond the edges of your thinking. If you now become aware of your self-thinking, but not so much focusing on thinking itself or what you're thinking about, but what's beyond the edges of your thinking. Does thinking fill the whole universe? Or is there some space or stillness or silence just beyond the edges of thinking? Underneath it, to the side of it, above it. And perhaps there's also a little bit of peace, some sense of peace in the space that's just outside of thinking, around it. Breathe through that peace. Breathe with the stillness that's beyond the edges of thinking, the edges of the body. As if the inhale arises and spreads out into that peace and returns from that peace as you exhale. And is your thinking non-stop? Or is there also some peace or space, stillness between your thoughts? At the end of one thought, before a new thought begins, if you allow your thinking to become quieter and softer, maybe with pauses, can you experience stillness or silence, spaciousness between your thoughts? And can you breathe with that? Include that in your awareness. When one thought is finished, perhaps it leaves, disappears into that stillness. Sometimes by feeling the pauses, the gaps between thoughts, perhaps with a sense of space between them, or silence, or stillness between them. There can also be a feeling of peace there. And that could be true for what's beyond the edges of our emotions, edges of our pain, aches, edges of our body. All things are surrounded, sooner or later, by an absence, by space or stillness or silence that's closely related to peace, calm. That creates a wider context for being mindful of body, mind, emotions, thoughts. And how do you how do you experience peace if you don't use your thinking to tell yourself you're peaceful? When our awareness is congested with thoughts, it can be claustrophobic, and there's not much room for anything else. But when our awareness is more expansive than just the thinking, includes much more the space, spacious, a sense of peace or allowance, stillness and silence. That creates space in the heart to feel the joys and sorrows of the world. to feel the joys and sorrows of the world, and for our heart's response to have room, the heart's tenderness and our heart's care and love and feeling of kinship with all beings. And may it be that at the end of meditation, we call on whatever benefits we received from meditation to open our hearts to the joys and sorrows of the world, and consider how the channels, the threads that connect us all, how we can create healthy channels and healthy threads by living ourselves for the benefit and welfare of others, and for the benefit and welfare of ourselves, as if those two are not different. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be fully free. So this is now the fourth talk on mindfulness of thinking. And today the topic is being mindful of non-thought, being mindful of something different than just thinking. And not just, mindful of the body or emotions or other things which are very helpful to include in mindfulness. But as we think, as we're aware of thinking, there can be a tendency to get narrowly focused on thoughts. And one of those reasons is that it can be what we think about can be either very concerning, very important, it can be very entertaining and engaging. Somehow we can get pulled into the world of aboutness, about what we're thinking about and the stories and the possibilities there. But there's also non-thought. There's that which is beyond the edges of the thought. There's also, the whole universe is not filled with our thought. Though from within the thought, we don't think this way, but from within the thought, it's almost as if we act as if there is nothing beyond it. Many times we might assume that we're connected to the people in the world around us. But in fact, what we're mostly connected to is our projection, our ideas, our thoughts about the person or the things, our bias, the stories that we have about it, the perspectives we bring. And that veil of ideas and thoughts and projections and bias sometimes is quite thick. And sometimes, it completely misses the person. I sat a 3-month retreat once, and there was a woman there who I was attracted to. And I didn't focus on it too much for 3 months, but Certainly 3 months was long enough for my attraction to have fantasies, and the fantasies were long enough to go through a whole story slowly. And there was the story of meeting her and talking with her and um, having a relationship with her and getting married with her and getting divorced from her. And it was a whole life, over 3 months. And then at the end of the retreat, I never talked to this woman. We were in silent retreat. At the end of the retreat, we had a kind of circle where people had a chance to speak, say a few words about the retreat. And she spoke, and she had a very thick, obvious foreign accent. She was clearly not from the United States. And at that moment, my fantasy about her, just like the balloon, popped, because the whole fantasy assumed that she was from the United States. She was American, and she wasn't. And so I realized I didn't have a clue who she was. The whole fantasy was a projection of my mind, was ideas and thoughts about who she was that seemingly was nothing to do with her. So the idea that we live this way, we're in the world of aboutness and thoughts, and we often see that. In mindfulness practice, certainly we learn to observe thinking, to be mindful of it, to recognize it, to note it, to learn to let go of it. But it's also a skill, art, to expanding mindfulness, not to get rid of thoughts, not to have a problem with them, but not to focus on the content, what its thoughts are about, but begin looking around the edges of the thoughts, having a sense almost like a location for the thoughts. That's why some people find it very helpful to locate where the speaker system is, if they're thinking in words or an inner voice. Is it somewhere in the brain, in the mind, in the head, somewhere else, where that voice is talking? And to locate that if it's a particular place, then it's easier to kind of feel what's beyond that place, what's greater than that place. Also, if you think in images and it's projected on some stage or some screen, maybe in front of you, then also it's possible to expand outwards. And then beyond the edges of the thoughts, underneath it, behind it, between the gaps between thoughts, that you might be able to feel, sense, imagine that there's space or spaciousness, there's stillness, there's even a silence where there's no thoughts, an absence of thought, that has a kind of peacefulness to it, or has a certain kind of stillness that gives a different context to the thoughts. There's more than the agitation of thinking. There's also that which holds it, in a sense, this wider sense of spaciousness. And to be able to feel the mind expand outwards, the awareness to expand outwards beyond the thoughts, without letting go of thoughts or fixing thoughts or having any kind of judgments about thoughts, but let it get wider and wider awareness, then it's possible to not be trapped by thoughts. It's possible to be at peace with thoughts or not have a problem with them, not to impute too much value or importance. Certainly thoughts can be very important, but are we over-fixated on it? Is there clinging to them? Is there wanting? Is there fueling it and feeding it and all that? This is somewhat akin, this kind of exercise, to with the eyes. We can, if you can see, you can look forward in front of your head. But if you imagine yourself, what do you see behind your eyes, behind your head? And the eyes can't really see the head unless you're looking at a mirror. And so there's kind of like an absence there, actually, even though you know there's a head, there's kind of an absence in awareness. And that absence is kind of a fascinating absence, in that the non-seeing of our own head, a non-seeing of what's behind us. We can imagine what's behind us, but that absence is kind of little bit like, that's also a kind of thing, a kind of something to be aware of, that creates a little bit more space and openness and stillness for seeing. It's like you expand outwards, like maybe if you kind of lean back and rest in a very soft mattress and look at the sky, very spacious and relaxed. So in that absence, where we're not preoccupied, not caught, not clinging to anything, oh, there we are as well. We're present, but we've freed ourselves from the ways in which the mind fixates, clings, holds to things. And it's like there's space for things, there's room for things, breathing room for all things to be there. And in a sense, it's very respectful, because it allows all things just to be there without our interference, without our, clinging and holding and pushing away. And it also frees up thinking. That thinking becomes sometimes much more creative and interesting and wiser if we're not glommed onto it, fixated on it. So there are times, and maybe it's more likely in times when we're pretty relaxed and pretty centered and already, that it's possible to become aware of that which is beyond the edges of thinking, or that which is the stillness and silence that's in the gaps between thoughts. Or sometimes if it's thoughts get really, really quiet and still, they get thinner and thinner and thinner, just like a very thin gauze, or like a very thin cloud that's going by. And it doesn't seem to have any more weight or push or insistence or contraction. It's just kind of it's just phenomena floating by, a dust mote floating by. And then it's really clear that thought is like a bird or a cloud, dust floating in space, floating through the sky of the mind, the sky of awareness. And it's just a thought. And this idea of just a thought that we don't have to get involved in or do anything with can be so peaceful. We just watch it go by. Nothing to do with me. You don't have to identify with a thought or make it mine or define yourself by the thought and feel bad about having the thought. It's just this little thing that floats by in the vastness of the sky of the mind. And it's a sky which is peaceful or still or has no wind. So if what I'm talking about might make sense, there might be times where you can discover this kind of freedom and peace that's available, that doesn't have to be struggling with thoughts, but rather we open up wider to include more. And it can begin by recognizing your thinking, maybe doing a mental note, thinking, and then as we start recognizing, see it more clearly, oh, this is really thinking, then we begin kind of not being so identified or caught in the field of thinking. Oh, this is thinking. Yes, this is thinking. And in the awareness, we become more aware that the awareness is not the thinking. Awareness watches it or knows it. And then they begin to have this place where we can start noticing how awareness also is wider, bigger than the thought we have. And awareness is kind of coterminous, or awareness is kind of almost the same as the space around everything. So if what I'm saying makes sense, wonderful, and you can maybe use that sometimes in your practice. If it doesn't make sense, then one possibility for you is just imagine a little bit how it might be true. Don't question whether it's true or not, but just imagine how it might be true And in what circumstances might this be helpful? The best you can understand of what I'm saying. And then kind of just store it in the back of your mind. And someday, if you continue meditating, someday you might notice, oh, that's what's possible. When the time is ripe, maybe you'll now be prepared to see it more clearly and not overlook it or think it's incidental, that you're aware of something larger, the space that in which thinking is happening. So thank you very, very much. And so we have one more day on this topic tomorrow, mindfulness of thinking. And I look forward to our time tomorrow. Thank you.